Hi, my name's Ashley Osborne, and I did my interview with my roommate's dad. His name is Paul Stoller, and he is the managing partner at the Dalamote Rube Stoller law firm. His role is to basically, he's just in charge of all strategic decisions that are made. So he has a team that he works with that assists him in that decision making process, but overall, he has the final say over any decision that's made. The law firm itself has about 16 lawyers and 150 employees that work for them. They take individual cases and class actions primarily against big companies. They are mainly working nationwide, but they are working on expanding internationally. They've recently taken on some cases in the UK and are currently working on expanding into South America, specifically in Brazil. One of the things that Paul talked about that I thought was really interesting was his law firm's international strategy. Currently, they are working on claims against car manufacturers in the United Kingdom, specifically against Mercedes. Mercedes has claims against them for using illegal devices to pass emissions testing. And this actually is an issue throughout Europe as well, not just in the United Kingdom, but they're just focusing in the UK right now. And eventually, the law firm is going to branch out to those other countries throughout Europe and possibly other car manufacturers as well, because it involves more than just Mercedes. But right now, they're just taking on the Mercedes issue. And they are actually also about to expand into Brazil for environmental claims against them. He talked about how there's a lot of barriers to entry when trying to expand your business abroad. For example, the legal systems in the US and other countries are not identical, so they have to make a lot of adjustments for those different legal systems abroad. And also, they aren't technically allowed to practice law abroad because some of those different legal rules. So while they can work on the case, they actually have to hire local lawyers to sit in court because they themselves in the law firm cannot sit in court because they are not from that country. In addition to that, there's the threat of government instability where they could spend all this time and effort setting up what they need to, but if the government were to collapse because it's already a little bit unstable, they've already wasted all of their time and resources into setting everything up, and they've kind of just lost all of that like that. And additionally, there's a lot more complex tax issues in the foreign markets that they kind of have to adjust to. So this kind of ties into the localization versus globalization that we talked about in class. Whereas if they were just globalizing and just trying to sell the exact same product abroad, it probably wouldn't work for them because although they are selling the same service of law, they are having to localize and make these adjustments for each country that they end up going to. Another part of the interview that I found really interesting was when he talked about the way that his law firm experiences competition. So they experience competition a lot differently than most firms would, and kind of what we learned about in class. They sort of rely on other law firms to refer the clients to them while also competing against those same competitors for the clients. So they really have to work with a lot of their competitors, and it involves a lot of cooperation. So it creates this really interesting dynamic to where while they are still competing for those clients and they're competing for court appointments to lead litigation, they really have to work together or else they won't receive as many clients. And as I mentioned previously, they are working on expanding abroad, which automatically gives them a little bit of a competitive advantage over any of those competitors because it takes a lot to be able to expand themselves abroad. It takes a lot of planning, time, money, and effort. So while these other competitors could eventually expand abroad just as they did, it's going to take a lot of planning and resources to be able to get to the point that his law firm is currently at abroad. So the last major thing that I really took away from this interview was his discussion about the external environment surrounding his law firm. The biggest threat within the external environment is potential legislation and court rulings because they have really no say about what happens or what's ruled. For example, one of the biggest things that they're facing right now is tort reform, which is basically to limit or eliminate the rights of individuals to pursue compensation for injuries caused by large companies. And since their the main thing that they do is help out individuals that are trying to make claims against large corporations. The more or the less rights that the individuals have, the more difficult it is for them to do their job. Also, unlike a lot of other organizations and firms, COVID and the economy don't really affect them that much like they would other businesses in the service industry. This is mainly because they aren't paid until successful resolution of the client's case. So there really is no downturn in clients if there's a drop in the economy or people having less money due to something like COVID. So even with this, the timing of the payment can still be a little bit of an issue, mainly because since or due to COVID, a lot of the courts are delayed and everything's being pushed back a lot. And also the companies themselves have less money to, they have less ability to pay to resolve a claim against them. So everything just kind of gets pushed back and delayed, and it's a little bit complicated from that aspect. But the economy and COVID still aren't a huge deal to the law firm itself. It's mainly just the legislation that could be put in place. I definitely learned a lot from having this interview. And for me, one of the biggest things I took away from it is that really every single firm has to deal with business strategy in some sort of way. And I didn't really think of a law firm as someone that would have to really focus on it. But after having the interview, I realized that they face the exact same thing that any other firm would face. And it was also really interesting to hear the take on COVID because that is something obviously that's huge right now. And almost every single firm I feel like that I hear about is really struggling with the impacts of COVID. And I kind of just assume that every single firm across the nation would be facing that. But it was really interesting to hear about how this law firm specifically isn't really impacted by it just from the way that they run. And I just feel like there are so many things that I learned from the interview that I had never really thought about before.